Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our Academy on Air series today. We're going to be talking about mobile UX. So this is the first of a number of mobile series. Today we're going to talk about the really exciting topic on how to drive conversions, looking at UX principles. Following this, we're going to talk about M-site speed next week, and the week after that, talking about mobile formats. So really happy that you've all joined. We've got a really good representation from all over EMEA. So really hope that you're going to get a lot out of this. Just to introduce myself, my name is Mairead, and you may or may not have picked up that that's an Irish name. And I work here in our Dublin office where I'm from. And I'm with my wonderful colleague, Indra.
Hi, everyone. My name is Indra, and I work as Mobile User Experience Manager here in Dublin as well.
Perfect. So Indra knows all the technical details. So if anyone has any questions or anything they want to ask us, please feel free to use that functionality and we'll get to them at the end of the session. So let's get started. What we are here to talk about today is user experience. And before we even get into the details, before we get into the principles and how you do this correctly, just consider the fact that you yourselves are consumers. And you know exactly what it's like to go onto a site that has poor UX. So from that perspective, you can just use your own intuition to know what is right and what's wrong. Even considering looking at these two images in front of you, you'd know which site you're definitely more likely to purchase from. You'd know which one you'd feel safer purchasing from. And what we're going to do today is actually go through really specific things that you can do to create that. But also just remember, put yourself in the consumer shoes. A really, really easy test then is just ask yourself, when is the last time that you actually went to a group of consumers that had never heard of your brand, never seen your site, and asked them to do something on it? This is a really, really simple way of getting UX testing, and you can learn a phenomenal amount, even from a couple of people. So our first suggestion today, before we tell you what to do, is ask people, how are they using your site? What are the pain points and what's coming up? The next thing is that this is huge. And a lot of the people who are joining here, you're advertisers, you're digital marketers, you're experts, and you are masters of making sure you target the right people at the right time with the right content. But what happens once they click through that ad? What happens once they actually get to the site? And that's where the really, really important stuff comes in. So businesses who have really good M-sites sometimes have 140% more revenue. Now, as you can agree, Indra, we would say that that's a massive number. And Indra has worked on numerous clients where they've worked with UX and seen the results almost instantly in terms of conversion rates, in terms of ROI. So this is something that you definitely need to prioritize for your business. The situation is that you are now not just competing against your local competitor. You're now not just competing against someone around the corner or across the road. This is a global environment. And if someone can't find what they want on your site, they can go to Amazon, they can go to eBay, they can look at sites like Uber. What this has done is really increased user expectation. So you're not just being compared to the people you always were, you are being compared internationally and globally. So when we're looking at the type of best-in-class user experience, this is who you need to match up to, and these are the examples that we need to follow. Now I'm going to hand it over to Indra, who's going to actually tell us from our perspective what makes a good mobile experience.
Yes, exactly. From Google perspective, we tend to view good user experience as three pillars, consisting of speed, design, and content. As we were mentioning before, we will focus on speed topic in the next Hangout on Air, so we tend to really keep an eye for that. But today we will really focus on design and content. So moving into design and what it really means. Google has collected a study that we call 25 Principles of Mobile Web Design. There are specific studies for retail as well as apps. So if you're interested, I would really encourage you to look it up. However, our researchers looked into finding similar patterns and decided to come up with these 25 design principles that tend to be mentioned by numerous users of the research, particularly on homepage and site navigation. So think of it from the landing page perspective. This is the first interaction that user has when they land on the page. Thinking from a mobile perspective as well, above the fold area that users see first is the first screen that we see on mobile. So we really recommend to communicate as much information and have very clear landing page structure that would make sense for the user and be very user-centric. In terms of site search, that's another big topic and particularly important one for retail clients. From our perspective, we see that users that tend to use search on mobile sites are 140% more likely to complete a transaction. So if it's something that is important for your website, I would really recommend to make it very prominent so users can find your search functionality very easy.
And on that, would you say that most sites would benefit from having a site search? Because that's a question we get a lot. Even if you're not in retail, do you think it's important to have that?
If you have relevant search results and you have search that really performs well, and if it's something that is important for your business, I would definitely recommend exposing it and making it very prominent. Because oftentimes, even when you see a small icon of the magnifying glass, users still tend to confuse it to making the font size bigger. They might not necessarily be very familiar with functionality. So I would really recommend to make it very prominent and have a separate field that would be explicit for the user that this is a search functionality.
Right.
And from this webinar perspective, we would like to focus a little bit more on the commerce and conversions, as well as form entry optimization advices, because we really feel that particularly these two steps can benefit our businesses the most, especially in Q4, which is one of the busiest times of the year. So we will have a few more of very practical examples that we'll share with you later. And also from usability and form factor perspective, I'm a big fan of accessibility scanner app, so I would recommend to look it up if that's something that could be interesting. It's really easy to download it, and then you can check all the websites that you would be interested in checking, evaluating it from usability perspective. So sometimes, of course, we intuitively feel that maybe the search field is not big enough, maybe some form fields are not convenient to use. And this is just purely based on intuition. If we really want to be more confident in reaching out to our developers with asking them to make the buttons bigger or have more data points, in that perspective, I would really recommend to use the usability scanner app, because then you can really make informed decisions in if the structure makes sense. Going a bit deeper into conversion on mobile, from my perspective, very interesting point is actually a security topic that we see as stat number 2. So one way of communicating and reassuring user of security aspect would be to really use call to action buttons in a very smart way. Oftentimes I would see, next, proceed, but they are not informative enough. Users really care about security aspects, so call to action could be an ideal place to communicate about that. For example, if you would proceed onto transaction, you could really easily communicate proceed to secure checkout, or just use the lock symbol, because that also communicates security aspect, and it really speaks to our clients. I always like to mention that all the ideas should be A/B tested. So oftentimes we tend to recommend best practices. However, I really like saying that what works for one client might not necessarily work for the others. So in a bit, we will be going through multiple examples, but really evaluate what it would mean for your business, because these are just best practices. It might not necessarily mean that it would have a strong uplift in your case. So all the ideas should be A/B tested, and I would really recommend doing that.
Yeah. And Indra, just as you said there, we're going to give a lot of recommendations. So one best practice that we would have is not to start implementing all the changes straight away, because that will corrupt, obviously, the A/B test, because you can't pinpoint which thing will make the change. So do you think there's any number of recommendations to introduce at the same time, or just keep it minimal?
I'll really try to think from the perspective that what would be the most impactful one. Yeah. So oftentimes form is something that is relatively easy to start with. Yeah. Also landing page experience, and maybe changing around some of the items there. And again, reiterating that it's really important to be able to attribute which change
made the difference.
Exactly. So really keep that in mind.
Perfect.
And moving on into conversion section and a few more practical examples. So we were mentioning it already before, but it's really important to assist cross-device action, because oftentimes the first interaction that user has would be on mobile, and conversion later on would happen on desktop device when we potentially have more time or have just a better environment to complete it. Oftentimes it might involve multiple people also before we really decide to buy something. So it's really important to assist this behavior. So a few examples that we could be using. For example, if you have a form that is very, very lengthy and might be taking a lot of time to complete it on a mobile device. So maybe it's something that you want to email to yourself, and then you would be able to pick up where you left off. That is really something that would make user experience a lot better. Another example could be just emailing the product or service to yourself or person you want to email it to, or also allow to share it via social media in a private message. That could be something that
when you think of that, what goes through my head is if I'm trying to buy a new outfit and I want to share it with someone before you confirm, you just want to share it to them in the message and say, hey, do you like this? And then you can come straight back and buy it. Usually I'm just screenshotting it, but this makes so much difference, sending in an email, sending via chat.
Exactly. It's just this behavior and makes it a lot easier from user perspective. Yeah. And also what a lot of brands do, the closer you get to the checkout process, the less distracted you are. So for example, what Nike does in this particular case, if you would click on Nike icon, you wouldn't be able to go back to their homepage. It really reduces the noise and sort of distractions. And also what I tend to see in a lot of websites the client websites that I work with, I would still see social media buttons, sometimes even subscribing to newsletter at this particular stage. It's really important to reduce all the distractions from user perspective. So if checking out is one most important thing, really keep the user focused at this particular stage. Another thing that we really want to see as users is progressive checkout process. So I would even recommend sometimes to take it as step 2. So in general, we really like to see progress in the actions that we're taking. So the first step could be, for example, choosing the product that you want to buy. And then once you start filling in the form, that would be the step number 2 already. So that really helps us to get through the checkout process easier, and also helps us anticipate how many steps we still have left. So I'd really recommend to have this progress bar on your website. Checking out as a guest. I don't think I would be wrong in saying that this is the most loved feature from user perspective. And of course, users have different preferences. Some of us, we like to sign in with our social media profiles. Some of us, we tend to use email all the time and keep it more private. Oftentimes, users have different preferences, and it's really important to allow a different behavior. However, if you do not support guest checkout, I would really recommend considering it, because it's really something that we expect to see on different websites. And it really increases the number of conversions that we're seeing later on. One of the latest APIs we have from Google perspective would be Credential Management API. So that is also something that allows us to support different ways of signing in. And it is only supported if we have guest checkout. So I would recommend looking it up, because it also allows us to see increase in conversions in supporting checkout as a guest.
I totally agree with that one. That just comes up all the time, and even from myself, I think that's the number one reason I wouldn't buy it. They'd have to sign up. And from a marketing perspective, the pushback here is we need people's information, we need their email address. And of course you can do that. They just don't have to be forced to create an account to get that information.
Definitely.
Thanks,
Going on to
Indra.
optimization.
So Indra's obviously giving us really great insight there into conversion rate optimization based on how we can improve the conversion flow. If you have any questions around that, please feel free to submit them and we can have a look at them afterwards. What I want to talk to you about now is form optimization. So for those of you who have lead generation, who have forms on your site, like Indra said at the beginning, this is a major pain point for people. And as we've been talking about this entire time, all we're trying to do is make sure that the experience is seamless and that at every single point you are removing friction and you're just making it easier for the consumer to get to the area that you want them to get to. So bearing that in mind, this goes back to what Indra said at the very beginning, using descriptive call to actions. This is an area where you can really add a little bit of personalization, and then you can make sure that the user moves progressively onto the next action. Or like Indra said, you can make sure that they're aware that they're going to a secure checkout, or that they're going to the next step. This is something that can be changed quite easily, because essentially what we're doing is changing the text on a button. So instead of just saying checkout, submit, next, continue, instead of using these really vague, ambiguous terms, what we want to do is say things like continue to delivery, proceed to buy, just adding in that little extra bit so that the consumer knows A, where they are, and B, where they're going. And that's back to what Indra pointed out in the beginning. We're setting the user expectation. So if you're looking at your site and you're looking at the call to actions that you have right now, are you using the really vague ones, like those common next, continue, or are you being directive and instructional and letting the user know where they're going next? The next one is an interesting one because it's something that we've all experienced a lot, reducing the number of fields. And when we go and speak to clients about this, it's very hard for them to let go of a certain field, in that they think that every single step is crucially important, or that it has to be added in there. So what we're trying to do is get the user to complete the transaction in a really quick and easy way. So examine your form, examine your fields. Can you maybe alter any of these? Can you reduce them? So how can you do this? One thing is that if you have an optional field, don't even have it as optional. Maybe just get rid of it completely and make it visually shorter and also shorter to complete. The example there, I still see people with fax number, email, telephone. Do you really need all of those, or could you potentially remove one of those optional fields? Another point, and again, it really depends on your user base and how they like to interact with your site, is how can you potentially shorten the name? So do you need to have title, first name, last name, middle name, or could you potentially have one field which just says full name? So it's these type of little things that you can alter quite quickly that can make a significant difference.
Just on the full name perspective as well, it's a lot more culturally inclusive. So for the users that have multiple last names, it just has better user experience. And still, the most natural way for us to fill in information would be just enter our full name. And then if you still see last name as a separate field, we would have to go back and delete it. This works particularly well for retail clients. However, I had a few clients from lead generation and insurance type of websites tested. So in their case, it didn't make a difference having, two fields rather than one. But again, A/B testing is the best solution here.
Exactly. So I just think that's a really interesting point, that like even from a cultural standing point and considering the different people around Europe. So if you are a market that exports, are you being inclusive of that and something that can enable the user to get through the form more quickly? A huge pain point that we get a lot is entering your address. Like it's so frustrating having to put in several lines, especially if many of them are mandatory. So one option here would be to use the Google Places API. And what this will essentially do is allow the user to search by typing in a few characters, and then they can add in their full address. Do you think that this is a good recommendation that most people could use?
I would definitely think so, yeah. I see a lot of businesses benefiting from it. And also autofill. When we compare sites that don't use autofill versus the ones that use it, they have 75% higher completion rates. So that is also something I would highly recommend, using autofill.
Yeah, so 75% again is extremely significant, and definitely something that you can implement quickly and efficiently. And so if you haven't got these type of tools, and Indra also talked about another API, the credential management one. So just have a look at the tools that we are offering out there, and can they possibly be integrated into your business. And the third one, really, really simple, but we need a billing address and we need a shipping address. And a lot of people at the moment are already following this perspective, but just to make sure that you already have it duplicated, you already have billing as shipping set as the default, because in most cases it will be the same. And then of course leaving an option for someone to fill out their shipping if it's different. That way the user doesn't have to be frustrated by simply filling out two of the exact same information. The next one is one of the crucially important ones, because what we're talking about here is inline validation. I think we've all been there where we've filled out an extremely long form, got to the bottom, click submit, and it says, please go back and correct errors. That's extremely frustrating, and you can go into this never-ending loop, which is known as pogo sticking, of going forward and backwards, trying to figure out, where did you get it wrong? Did you put in the telephone number wrong? What's happening here? This is so simple. We're just asking you to use inline validation, which lets the user know ahead of time that something's missing or that something's wrong or that maybe they've incorrectly added in their email address. And you can see here that it doesn't need to be aggressive red inline validation. It's actually kind of nice. It says, we need your first name. It's nicer that way. So just that's another way that you can add in a bit of personalization, and then you can kind of say to the user, hey, you've made a mistake, but don't worry. So that's something really important to keep in mind. If the user becomes too frustrated by the amount of times that they have to go back and fix the form, the likelihood is that they might abandon the cart or the form or the lead generation. So really have a look at the options you have there, and could you potentially implement this on your site? The other thing then is, how can you simplify? And going back to the entire message of this webinar, it's how can I simplify things? How can I make things easier for my user? And this is something that Indra is actually going to go into in more detail to actually talk you through an entire case study, which can sometimes bring things to life and really, really help people understand. All we're saying here, though, is is there a step that you could just break down slightly? So in this particular example, we're looking at a drop-down menu. And if there's only 2 options in the drop-down, do you need a drop-down? No, you can just have these circular buttons here where people can choose. So what we're doing there is removing an entire step. So any type of friction we can remove is absolutely crucial. The final one that I'm going to talk about is using the correct keypads. Again, it might not have been something that will be at the top of your mind, but all that we're saying here is that if you're looking to fill in a field that is numeric, then surface the number pad. And if you're looking at a field like a name or an address, surface the character pad. And you can use numeric in particular, of course, for phone numbers and postcodes, but also your credit card info. What we're trying to do is remove the step of the user having to switch between these different keywords and actually make sure that they can enter the information in as quickly as possible. Just to show you very quickly how that can be done, in a HTML file, we have different input types, and what we all want to do here is just actually specify what's what. So having a look at if it's in a number field, make sure that the input type is number, email, and so on. And this type of information is also very useful, particularly for inline validation, because then you can actually point out where someone might have made a mistake in the input type or in the wrong field. Do you think I'm missing anything with form optimization? Or?
Maybe just a good use case scenario. For example, in the UK, most commonly used keyboard would be of different kinds. So you need digits and letters as well. So just keep in mind situations like that. And I would really recommend just to do a test checkout. Yeah. And I tend to use fakenamegenerated.com type of website to look up details and really test it out.
Fakenamegenerated.com.
Because then you can even test with credit card details and, you know, almost complete the checkout. Obviously, the card will be declined, but at least you can test the user experience there.
Does the fake name did you just make up the credit card then, or it generates you a whole identity?
Yeah, it generates the whole identity of someone living in a different country. So it can be from US, from UK, from different locations in Europe and all over the world.
So just to test out your checkout functionality with a fake identity.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. Brilliant. So that brings us to the end of the form optimization. Like I said, Indra's now going to talk us through someone who did this really successfully and put this into practice.
Yeah, we decided to go for this one because we believe that it might be a brand that most of you might be familiar with. So Mango is a famous retailer from fashion. And they had the problem that I believe a lot of businesses are facing. So too many users were abandoning carts on mobile. It's quite universal across different verticals. And not only for retail, but also for travel, for different type of businesses out there. So I would like to show you a few examples of how their website looked before and what they did to implement changes and how it looked like afterwards. So as we were mentioning before, real estate on mobile is really limited. So using your space efficiently could be something that you could really benefit from. So for example, in the first screen, we're seeing that users are not exposed to all information that they're seeing. It's very important to show them as much as possible in the very first screen that they're seeing, because then they're able to anticipate how long the process will be, and also gives them heads up in what else to expect in different sections. So small change like that can really have a big impact. And that particularly applies for a landing page experience, where if we're able to see, say, hero image and then shortcuts to main categories, it can really help us make a faster way of navigating through the site. So I would really recommend to follow these type of best practices to make use of the space in the most efficient way.
Because I think this goes back to what you had said. If you look at the screen before, you might just be only aware that a returning user can purchase. With a complete revamp means new customer. So the way we pointed out that a huge abandonment rate might happen if you don't have a guest checkout functionality, it's exactly the same thing here. Someone, even though they actually have the technicality here, you might not even realize it because it's so small.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought I would also explain the abbreviation that we see here. So ATF is above the fold. So really the first screen that users are seeing once they are interacting with the website on mobile. And then second thing they improved the checkout flow. So you saw already this particular screen before, but essentially when it comes to usability, we tend to measure it in number of taps that users have to do to complete a certain action. And in this particular case, Mango used to have a drop-down menu for only having 2 options. So really, if you have, say, even up to 5 different delivery methods, different prices, it's really important to show all of them at once, because then we don't have to go back and forth in order to compare it and choose the one that we want to choose. But also it helps us move faster in completing the form. So that would be really something I would recommend. And this can be applied in different cases. For example, if you have oftentimes I would see it for age or for number of people that are traveling. So really try to make it as efficient as possible and think of it from number of taps that user has to take to complete a certain action perspective. And then improving the checkout flow. So again, using the space in the most efficient way. So in the screen before, we see that this same action takes a lot more space than the outdated version. So choosing the cart can be communicated in a really more efficient way, where you're just able to see the cart, see the logo of it. It helps us process information a lot faster and choose the one that we want to choose in a most efficient way. So it's really something that is relatively easy to implement. It's just basically changing the way how you display information, but it can really help to improve your checkout flow and user experience for your clients.
So the recommendation here is that we want to see what the options are before they go in. And presumably because you might start it off and then you realize, oh, they actually had PayPal down the bottom. I think I would have preferred that.
Exactly. And this is just assuming that Visa might be the most popular way of paying. However, it might not be, especially if you're operating in multiple markets. It's really important to just show all the options, and then users can make a decision that is the most relevant for them.
Absolutely.
And then when it comes to expanding information, for example, here, it's also just using space in a bit more efficient way. So we see that 2 fields were just moved in terms of how they are placed, and also adding a CVC explanation sometimes can benefit users as well, because not all users are familiar with it.
That's actually, when I look at it like that, so many people don't even register what the letters are and always clicking on this little, and where to find it as well, and where can you actually get your CVC code, and oftentimes clicking on that you have the actual image of where it is. So very important.
Yeah, exactly.
Can't buy anything without that.
And then one of the last advices we would have would be actually displaying the order summary, because oftentimes users want to be really sure about the size that they chose, or also, even from my perspective, if I'm booking flights, I really tend to double check multiple times if I really chose the correct date. So that's something that we really want to see as users. We want to see the summary of what we're committing to before we actually decide to purchase something. So again, just adding this extra step can really help reassure our users. And this again could be another way to communicate security aspects. So instead of maybe confirm payment, you could add additional word, confirm payment securely. Or
definitely better than submit or continue, but always room for improvement in all sites.
Always A/B testing. And this is how it looked like afterwards. So you're able to navigate between different sections. You're able to go back in case you want to. However, users are still focused, not distracted, because you cannot go back to the homepage at this particular step. And that's what we want to have. We want users to be focused and not distracted by different elements that are not necessarily needed at that particular stage. And these are the results that they saw. So obviously, they saw uplifted mobile conversions, but also they saw additional revenue for their business. And this is something we want to emphasize as well in this webinar, that sometimes just optimizing the existing assets that you have and really A/B testing the ideas of different kind can really benefit your business. And we as users, we're very intuitive. So oftentimes I recommend just completing transaction of the clients that you're working with, especially on different devices. So I would recommend doing it from both Android, iOS, different devices that you even have across your office. And really try to think what would be the ways to improve the user experience there. And if there's something that the clients could be implementing or at least testing to see more value for their business.
So again, just to reiterate what Indra said, we've given a lot of ideas today around how you can improve the site and what type of things you can do. There's a few things there that are very, very simple and you could implement in a few hours. However, we would stress that even as Indra has pointed out, for some situations it works incredibly well and we see a huge uplift, and in others we don't. So it's really, really important that you do this in small steps and that you actually check out different areas to make sure that it's worked for you and worked for your business. What we'll just do very quickly is check if we have any questions. So if you have anything that you want to submit now, please feel free to do so. Okay, so we had some from Panos, 1K Design, and Oleg. So payment in 3 steps, that's the last one we got, is better than 1. So I think what Oleg is asking there is, what is the shortest path for it? Would we prefer a shorter path or maybe a payment done in 1 page, I'd imagine?
I see it working in different ways for different clients. So say, for example, for insurance, we prefer to have a longer form. So oftentimes a single page checkout is what we call, is a bit more popular for businesses that do tend to have a lot more information. However, some of the things can be very cultural as well. So I remember seeing some of the tests for retail clients that if they were operating in APAC markets, they chose to have a different checkout form with a lot more steps in it. Whereas, say, in Europe or US, we tend to like different steps and seeing progress as we proceed. So it can be, again, something that could be easily A/B tested, and would definitely recommend doing that.
Yeah, and to that end, I know it's difficult here, it depends, but it does. Some of the clients that we've worked with have actually been really successful with using payment method whereby you scan the card and all the information comes in straight away. So from that end, it's filled in extremely quickly. However, in some markets, that's not well received and people don't perceive it to be a secure checkout. So there's a lot of different options to explore within that. We're getting a good few questions about tools. So Panos and Annie Nice Music have kind of asked, where do we find these testing tools and what A/B testing platform do you suggest? So Google Analytics does have its own free A/B testing tool as well, where you can modify different pages along the landing page and then run this A/B test throughout. And if that's something that you're interested in doing, it's completely free of charge. And we would obviously recommend this as an excellent A/B testing tool. Do you have any other ones that you would recommend?
Google Optimize is another one that you could be potentially considering. And also there are other non-Google tools. So for one really common one could be Optimizely. We see that being very commonly used by different clients. So it really depends on what would be the functions that you're looking to have. So if you have, for example, coding skills, or if you're looking for more of a tool that would be easier and more convenient to use without this knowledge. So it really depends. And I would say what's more important here than choosing the tool is actually having the mentality of doing more A/B testing, because it can really benefit different businesses.
Yeah, and even again within it's not specifically related to UX, but even within your AdWords account, there's tons of A/B testing tools and experiments and drafts that you can run as well. And you can even run that very simply for testing landing pages to see what's working best on mobile. There's an interesting question there from KernelPad. I think this could be a great one for you, because what KernelPad has asked is, what's the best way for a beginner to get into UX UI design as a profession, and how would you do it? And as someone who has become a UX UI expert, were there any tips that you would give KernelPad?
I would say Sketch is definitely one of the tools I personally like the most. I think it's very intuitive and easy to use, so I tend to use it quite often myself. As a team, we sometimes run design sprints, which is a framework that was developed by Google Ventures team. So, for example, there the goal is to do the research, choose problem statement, and then prototype and move as fast as you can to really build high fidelity prototype in a relatively short period of time. So at that particular stage, if you're looking for a more scrappy solution, even using something like Keynote or any tools to make even presentations could be something that could be useful as well. I would say from UX UI perspective, I'm thinking what else is there. Obviously, there are so many different courses online that are accessible to everyone.
I think there's huge amounts. Even lynda.com runs a lot. I know you do need a subscription for it, but they're very heavily focused on UX UI. And because UX has become so important, not even from just an internet perspective, but just UX in general, any digital marketing newsletters like eMarketer, Mobile Marketer, consistently talking about UX UI. I'm just thinking about another tool that we used to use that had the heat maps, but I can't remember the name of it, that lets you know how the UX UI was performing. We have it on Google Analytics as well. There's an excellent free tool that you could analyze the UX through it, but maybe we can post that one after. So it's really exciting that you're obviously interested in getting into UX UI, and there's tons of information that we have to give you and tons of information that you'll be able to figure out alone. Are there any other questions there that you'd like to jump into? Thanks so much for asking questions. It's brilliant.
I like the one about recommending if call to action should be in above the fold in mobile views. I would tend to give two answers to that. So oftentimes I would recommend either having repeated call to action, so have it in above the fold, and then if you have a bit more information, repeating it for the user so they don't have to scroll back and forth, or having a floating call to action. So it really depends what's more important for your website, but of course, making it more user-centric and making it easier to access the call to action and proceed to further steps, it's definitely something I would recommend.
There's another question there from Vastia F. So what they're wondering is, what do you say about a coupon field on mobile checkout? Does it need to be exposed, or is it better hidden, like in Dropdown? So for this one, especially if it's to do with the promotion or maybe it's a student discount, we would see them quite heavily exposed at the beginning so that people don't forget. Sometimes you'll have a little marking that people will say, can enter promotional code at next step, but just to let users remember. A lot of people will, if they've come to your site because they have a coupon or promotional discount, you don't want to frustrate them by having them look for it. Where do I enter this? Because then they won't complete the purchase. So for me, I would definitely recommend that it is visible. Do you have anything that?
Yeah, exactly. If it's really commonly used feature, I would definitely give it more prominence, and just kind of looking at your own data and understanding how often it's being used by your users.
Yeah, brilliant. Arthurs has asked us, does it make sense to put delivery info first if delivery price is crucial in quantity that can be bought? I think that's maybe asking, is it about the address, or how would you read this question?
I would say maybe shipping versus billing address. This is just me assuming.
Yeah.
I would say so. If it's really, again, something that is crucial for the business to know, definitely. Anything that users want to see as being primary action, or if it's something that they expect to see, or if it's something that you need to be able to process their order, giving it more prominence then.
Yeah, Brilliant. So I don't think we have time for any more questions today, but we will get back to any of the questions that you have given us, and we really appreciate your engagement. We appreciate you staying to the end of our Hangout on Air. Just as a quick reminder that next week we're going to go in depth with 2 web developers into M-Site Speed. What are the tools that you can use? How can you quicken it up? And what are the things that you need to be considering? So it was an absolute pleasure to have you all here today. And thanks again for the engagement. And thanks so much for being part of Academy on Air.
Great. See you guys. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.